The morning I was supposed to board the bus south for spring training, I stood in our frozen barnyard with my duffel bag in one hand and watched my father pretend not to limp. You'd think a moment like that would come with trumpets or a storm rolling in from the hills, some kind of grand signal from the heavens. But all I remember is the soft steam rising off the backs of our Holsteins and the way the frost clung to the fence posts like powdered sugar. It was early March of 1962, the kind of upstate New York morning that bites your ears and makes the inside of your nose sting. I was 21 years old, a left-handed pitcher with a decent curveball and a fastball that could hum if I got my shoulder loose enough. The contract was already signed. A small farm team affiliated with a big league club, one of those organizations where you start in a place with more cornfields than grandstands and pray your arm holds out long enough to move up. The letter had come in January, heavy cream envelope, my name typed neat as a hymn. I kept it folded in the top drawer of my dresser next to a stack of handwritten scorecards from high school games, corners soft from being handled too often. Folks in town treated me different after that letter arrived. At Peterson's Hardware, old men who'd never given me more than a nod started asking about my slider grip. At church, Mrs. Callahan squeezed my arm and said she'd look for my name in the box scores come summer. Even my high school coach, who rarely smiled unless someone laid down a perfect bunt, slapped my back and told me not to forget the little people when I made it to the show. The plan was simple. Finish winter chores, head south for spring training, and see if I could carve out a place in that long, hopeful line of boys chasing the majors. My duffel was packed with 2 uniforms, a pair of worn leather cleats, and the glove my father had given me when I was 12, the one that still smelled faintly of oil and summer grass. But plans have a way of bending around promises. My mother had been sick on and off for years. Nothing dramatic at first, just spells of fatigue, a cough that lingered longer each winter. By 62, though, the doctors in Albany had started using words that settled heavy in a room. Words like progression and complications. She was in and out of the hospital that winter, the kind of place with linoleum floors that echoed under rubber soles and windows that looked out onto snowbanks gray with city soot. The first time she'd been admitted, years earlier, I was 16 and cocky and certain life moved in straight lines. I remember sitting beside her narrow bed, the smell of antiseptic sharp in my nose, the hiss of oxygen soft and steady. She'd reached for my hand, her fingers cool but firm, and said, "Promise me something, Danny." She didn't ask me to be a big leaguer. Didn't ask me to win championships or make money. She asked me to look after the land. "This farm's older than any of us," she'd said. "It's kept this family fed through drought and war. If anything ever happens to me, you make sure your father doesn't try to carry it all alone. Promise me you'll look after things." At 16, promises come easy. I squeezed her hand and said of course I would. I thought looking after the farm meant mowing a few extra acres and fixing a fence now and then. I didn't know promises sometimes wait quietly, like seeds under snow. By the time my bus ticket sat folded in my coat pocket, her illness had worsened. She'd come home from the hospital thinner, her hair tied back in a scarf, her smile determined but tired around the edges. My father said we'd manage. He always said that. He was a man who believed problems could be fixed with baling wire, patience, and an early start. But that March morning, as I stood there with my duffel bag, I saw him shift his weight before lifting a milk pail. I saw the way he paused halfway across the yard, as if measuring the distance. The barn doors groaned open, and the cows shuffled inside, hooves clacking on cold concrete. Milk pails clanged in the dim light, the rhythm familiar as a heartbeat. "You'll miss your bus if you keep standing there," he said without looking at me. His voice was steady. That was the worst part. If he'd asked me to stay, if he'd said, "Son, I need you," I might have felt cornered. But he didn't. He kept his eyes on the task at hand, as though this was just another morning and not the edge of something that would split my life clean in two. Inside the house, the kitchen radio was already on. AM static crackled between songs, and a sports announcer's voice drifted through, talking about early spring exhibitions down south. I imagined dusty infields under bright Florida sun, the sharp pop of a catcher's mitt, coaches squinting at stopwatches. My mother sat at the table wrapped in her cardigan, a mug of coffee cupped between both hands. She looked smaller than the kitchen chair. When I walked in, she smiled the way she always did, like she was glad I'd come home from school, even though I'd been living there all along. "Big day," she said. "Yeah," I answered, setting the duffel by the door. We didn't say much more. The radio filled the silence with talk of batting averages and rookie prospects. Somewhere, a pitcher was striking out 3 in a row under a sky already warming. Somewhere, a scout was scribbling notes about a kid not much different from me. After breakfast, I stepped out onto the porch. The field stretched pale and stiff with frost, early morning mist rising slow off the pasture. In the distance, the county road curved past our mailbox and disappeared behind a stand of bare maples. That was where the bus would come. I reached into my coat and felt the bus ticket between my fingers. Thin paper. Official. A doorway to another life. Behind me, the screen door creaked open. My father joined me, wiping his hands on a rag. "Your mother'll be fine today," he said. "Doctor's coming by this afternoon." "I know." He looked out over the fields, eyes narrowed against the light. "That team's lucky to have you. Not many lefties with your control." I let out a small laugh. "Control's easier when you know the strike zone." He nodded, like that meant something beyond baseball. A truck rattled past on the road, tires crunching over gravel. I felt my chest tighten. In my mind, I saw my teammates, boys I'd met at tryouts last summer, already packing their bags, already chasing that narrow ribbon of possibility. I imagined hearing their names on the radio come June, imagined the town crowding around Peterson's window to read box scores that might have included mine. "You don't have to stay," my father said quietly. There it was. Not a plea. Not a demand. Just the truth laid bare between us. I swallowed. The barn behind us smelled of hay and manure and worn leather. The tractor engine coughed to life in my memory, rumbling at dawn like it always had. I saw my mother in that hospital bed years earlier, her fingers curled around mine. "Promise me." Down the road, I heard it, the low growl of the greyhound approaching, engine echoing faint across the frozen fields. My father didn't look at me. He just stood there, shoulders squared against the cold. The bus came into view, blue and silver against the pale morning. It slowed as it neared the mailbox, brakes hissing. The door folded open with a mechanical sigh. For a moment, I felt both lives tug at me, the bright glare of stadium lights and the steady glow of our kitchen lamp before dawn. The roar of a crowd and the soft shuffle of cows in their stalls. My name crackling through a summer broadcast, or swallowed up in the simple rhythm of chores. The driver leaned out and glanced toward the house. I tightened my grip on the duffel, then loosened it. And instead of stepping forward, I turned around and walked back toward the barn. My father didn't say a word as I set the duffel down on a bale of hay. The bus door folded shut with a hollow clap, and a moment later the engine growled back to life. I didn't watch it leave. I didn't need to. The sound rolled down the road, thinning out until it became just another piece of morning noise. Inside the barn, the cows shifted impatiently. One of them let out a low, complaining moo that echoed off the rafters. I picked up a pail and slid onto the stool beside her, pressing my forehead lightly against her warm flank the way I'd done since I was big enough to reach. The milk hit the metal with a steady, ringing rhythm. Steam rose in the cold air. My fingers moved automatically, muscle memory taking over where ambition had just let go. By noon the frost had melted into soft mud. My duffel still sat on the hay bale, looking out of place, like it belonged to someone else. After chores, I carried it upstairs and slid it under my bed. I told myself I'd unpack later. I never did. Not for years. Word travels fast in a small town. By Sunday, folks knew I hadn't gone. Some tried to be kind about it. "Family first," they'd say, nodding in approval. Others looked at me with something like pity, the way you look at a horse that pulled up lame just before the finish line. Coach stopped by one evening, hat in hand. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," I said, because it was the truth. "But I'm staying." He studied me for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Then make sure you stay all the way." That first spring was harder than I'd imagined. Not because of the work, I'd been doing farm work my whole life, but because of the empty space where baseball had lived. At night, after supper, I'd turn on the kitchen radio. The AM signal would crackle and fade, but if I angled the dial just right, I could catch scores drifting up from Florida, then later from the minor league towns scattered across the South and Midwest. I heard names I recognized. Boys I'd struck out in tryouts were now being praised for their batting averages. A fellow lefty from Ohio had thrown a two-hitter. I'd sit at the table long after my parents went to bed, tracing imaginary box scores with my finger on the oilcloth, hearing in my head how my own name might have sounded sandwiched between theirs. Outside, peepers would start up in the marsh, and the smell of thawing earth would drift in through the screen door. I'd close my eyes and see a dirt infield under bright summer lights, dust rising as I pushed off the mound. I'd feel again the tight coil in my shoulder, the snap of the ball leaving my fingers. Then the alarm would ring at 4:30, and the tractor would need starting. There's a different kind of endurance in farming. No cheers. No seventh-inning stretch. Just the long haul from planting to harvest, from calving season to the first frost. My father and I fell into a rhythm, quiet, efficient. He taught me things he'd never bothered to explain before: how to read the sky for rain, how to judge hay by its smell, how to listen to an engine and know what it needed. My mother's good days grew fewer. Some afternoons, when the chores were done, I'd sit beside her on the porch swing. County fair banners would flap in the distance that July, bright red and blue against the sky. She'd ask about the herd, about the back pasture fence, about whether the north field might need rotating. She never mentioned baseball. One evening in late summer, I found her in the kitchen with the radio on low. A game broadcast drifted through, the announcer's voice warm and excited. She glanced at me, then back at the stove. "You miss it?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. She nodded. "It's all right to miss things." That fall, she went back into the hospital. The trees along the road burned gold and red, then shed their leaves in a rush of wind. I spent mornings in the barn and afternoons driving to Albany, the highway humming beneath the tires. In her hospital room, the world narrowed to the beep of machines and the faint smell of disinfectant. One afternoon, she squeezed my hand again, just like she had years before. "You kept your word," she whispered. I tried to answer, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. All I could think was how small her hand felt in mine. She passed before the first snow. After the funeral, the house felt cavernous. The radio seemed louder in the silence. My father moved slower, but he didn't stop. Neither did I. Winter chores have a way of demanding attention whether your heart is in them or not. By spring, something had shifted in me. The ache was still there when I smelled fresh-cut grass or heard a bat crack against a ball, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It had dulled into something steadier, like a low note humming beneath everything else. That was the year I married your grandmother. I'd known her since high school, known the way she laughed at my terrible jokes and the way she could stack hay bales faster than most boys. She never once said I'd made the wrong choice. When we danced at our wedding reception in the VFW hall, the band played an old standard, and I caught a whiff of summer air drifting in through the open doors. For a flicker of a second, it felt like standing on a pitcher's mound under lights. But when I looked at her, at the way she fit into the curve of my arm, I understood something simple and solid: life wasn't shrinking. It was just changing shape. Years rolled on. The farm grew. We added acreage, upgraded equipment, painted the barn a brighter red. Children's laughter replaced the hollow quiet in the house. I taught your father how to grip a baseball in the backyard, showed him how to tuck his elbow and follow through. Sometimes, on long summer evenings, we'd drive into town to watch the local team play under those same bright lights I used to dream about. I'd sit in the bleachers, the smell of popcorn and cut grass thick in the air, and feel that old question stir. What if? It never shouted. It never accused. It just lingered, soft as a breeze across the field. Then I'd look around, at your grandmother's hand in mine, at my father sitting straighter than he had in years, at my boy racing toward the dugout with his glove flapping at his side, and the question would settle back down. There are different ways to measure a man's life. Some folks count trophies. Some count paychecks. I used to think I'd measure mine in strikeouts and earned run averages. Instead, I counted seasons of harvest, counted calves born healthy, counted the mornings my father didn't have to limp alone across a frozen yard. Now, when I sit out here on this old porch swing and the night air smells faintly of hay, I can still hear a distant crowd if I try hard enough. I can see that bus door folding open, waiting. But I also see a barn at dawn, steam rising off warm backs, my father standing steady beside me. The truth is, I didn't stop being a ballplayer that morning. I just learned that the hardest pitches to throw are the ones no one else sees. And sometimes the promises we keep, quiet and unseen, are the ones that tell us exactly who we are.